Welcome to Studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we've discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
and Ryan Buller.
And today we're going to back up a little bit because last week we jumped ahead, sort of leapfrogged onto the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and we bypassed some of the virtues, which we've mentioned several times in some of our shows. So we're going to back up a little bit and discuss virtues and how we can grow in them.
So what are the virtues? What is a virtue, Ryan?
Yeah, I think we should start with what is a virtue. I think we defined this briefly in a previous episode, but it's always good to review it. Virtues are habits, as St. Thomas Aquinas refers to them, and I think, you know, it's not usually when we think of habits is sort of the beginning stage of forming a habit, where we're putting a lot of effort into thinking about it and being aware of it, and so we'll, you know, make these little reminder notes and things, you know, always do this new activity, this new habit. But to be virtuous, it means you've taken that habit onto your identity. You know, you are not just someone who tries to be courageous, you know, to use one example, but you are someone that people think of as a courageous person. So it does start with that, you know, being conscious and making an effort into forming these new habits. But then the goal is always to just sort of be ingrained in those habits, those virtues.
But you don't want them to be bad habits, because that's a vice, right? So the original, I always love to get the etymology of words, but the original arete, which is Greek, means excellence in being. And then in Latin, it was changed to virtus, effectiveness in action. So when we're talking about habits, we want them to be those that bring out the excellence of our being, right? Because I think just the opposite, those bad habits are actually what we would define as vices. So
yes, the virtues, they're all there. To extend the definition, you know, you're right, Cheryl. It's not just a habit, but sometimes referred to as the summit between the two opposing vices. So for every virtue, there's two opposing vices to it.
So what's interesting, go back in history, and in Aristotle's time, he had a concept of the golden mean. And we're not talking about the golden meme, but the golden mean. So not to be confused with that, of course, in today's social media. But, you know, Aristotle had, you know, we talk about, you know, what's in the middle, and he had what was the balance, and this is what Greeks kind of, you know, thought was the summit of what they wanted to accomplish at the time. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense of self-control, composure, temperance, friendship, good humor, honesty, modesty, courage, and generosity. Of course, one in there is ambition. And of course, for Greeks, that I think they thought that was the balance, you know, between sloth and greed. But of course, obviously, with our Christian faith, you know, we have, you know, raised them up even to another level, unto that spiritual level.
Yeah. So the Greeks, they had the four cardinal virtues of temperance, fortitude, justice, and prudence. And for them, prudence was the highest level to achieve. And this was using their faculty of reason, their intellect. So the other three virtues were all to aid in their reason functioning at the highest level. So, you know, we distinguish now as Christians, where we included the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, or love. But for the, you know, going back to the cardinal virtues, they're all about forming the habits, the good virtues that will allow our reason to function the best. So we look at the first one, temperance. It's sort of it's making our natural instincts, our drive for food and drink and sex, but subordinating those to reason, so to our reason, so that our passions for these things don't interfere with our good reason. And then when you look at fortitude or courage, that is subordinating our fear, that reflex away from dangerous things, keeping that from interfering with our right reason. So subordinating our fear to reason. And then justice is our ability to give others what is due, properly due to them. And so this sort of keeps in check our greed from interfering with our right reason, and always giving and seeing people as being dignified and being worthy of giving to them their rightful share. And so once you have these first three in place, you're a temperate person, you have fortitude, you're a courageous person, you're a just person, then your reason is able to function at the highest level. You're able to make prudent decisions. And so prudence is still a virtue of action. So it's not just, as it's sometimes referred to now, as just being cautious, but it assumes that you have these first three in place. And so for the Greeks, that was it. You had prudence, you were living the dream.
And it sort of orchestrates the other ones. Once you accomplish those other ones, it's considered like the orchestrator, overseer of all the virtue.
So I guess in terms of, we have these virtues, how can we incorporate these into our lives? Obviously, we were talking about temperance. I guess you would say the offshoot or the hidden hand behind that is humility. And the opposite of humility is obviously pride. And, pride is as the church father says, the saints say this, that pride is the father of all vices. And so, in terms of avoiding pride, which I think we all have to some degree or another. I mean, it's very very evident, I think, in all of us that, we might be offended if somebody says something. Is that, does pride get in the way? Or, in whether it's in a workplace or in the home, where does pride, kind of fit in? And so, of course, the overcoming pride is you can only do that through humility. And the church gives us a wonderful prayer of humility, which is really all-encompassing. And in a previous life, I would always offer that prayer in public when I had a chance. And I had people come up to me and say, "Man, that was a great prayer. That was a great prayer." And it was filled with a bunch of prideful people, I will say that. So it was something that touched their heart, because they knew that that all of us need to work on humility as best as we can.
I'm glad you started with humility, Jeff, as we dive a little bit deeper into the virtues, because I think St. Thomas refers to humility as sort of the root of all the virtues as they sprout up and branch off into all these seven main ones, and then many sub virtues. And then I think the Bible, or there's another good writing, I can't think of the name of the saint, that refers to humility again as the good soil, as Jesus from his parable of the seed that falls on good soil. But there's also, like, for every virtue, there's two opposing vices. And so you did a great job of explaining, pride, which is what we all need to mostly be on the lookout for. But there's also, seeing a sort of rise in this false humility in our age, where people will constantly sort of degrade themselves, talk down about themselves, or not sort of step in when they should. Sort of, again, going back to the point that virtue is always an action. It's never an inaction. So you're either making a step in the wrong direction or you're making a step in the right direction. There's no neutrality in the spiritual life. There's no neutral move in the virtuous life. And so with humility, if you're called to speak up and you don't, that's not because you're being humble. That's a false sense of humility. And to practice the way the saints were able to speak up without glorifying themselves, is they constantly brought everything back to the Lord. I'm going to speak this truth to you. I'm going to admonish you, or I'm going to teach you something new because the Lord has given this to me. And so that way you avoid the false humility of not speaking up when you should, or not acting when you should, and then also pride as well, and saying it's from me.
Well, an example is the fraternal correctness. People think, well, if someone's going off the reservation or doing or saying something, it's not my place to do or say anything, which in important matters, it is. I mean, it is extremely important that you at least confront the person, address the issue, and if that doesn't work, bring one or two others with you. And if that doesn't work, then, you go up to the top. So I think you're absolutely right, Ryan. The important thing is not to have that false sense, but to have that spiritual sense.
Also, I recognize one thing that you said, Ryan, about false humility and kind of bringing people have a tendency sometimes. I almost think if you have to say it, then it's not coming from you. Like you're advertising for it. Yeah. So like saying, I'm really, really bad at this. You know what I'm saying? Or trying to really deprecate yourself when it's not really true. Sometimes that's, in this category of what you're talking about. I mean, we need to be honest about our strengths, use our strengths, and really that doesn't counter our lack of humility by saying we're not so good at that when we really aren't.
Yes,
bad.
It brings to mind, Cheryl, now that you're speaking, Cheryl, as a wife and a mother, I notice, and with a lot of women, you walk into their houses and they're like, please excuse the mess. Is like the first thing they want to sort of, it sort of bring them, set the bar lower, like, they point out the mess, right away, or, they'll say, I think fathers oftentimes do this with children. They'll sort of talk bad about their children out of this sense of false humility, like because they're embarrassed, instead of just sort of being comfortable with where you are in your life, and having this humble recognition that I'm not perfect, and other people shouldn't expect perfection out of me and out of my children. But we're all on the road to formation. We're all sinners.
This is just a fun thing to throw in there. We were talking about a little bit earlier a virtue that I heard about years ago. I took our daughters to a retreat, and it was called, I think they just really wanted to say the word because it is fun to say, Eutrapelia. And Eutrapelia is a word from the Greek, meaning ready witness or liveliness. And the idea of that is just to understand the moderation of recreation. It's to not, and also was between buffoonery and
buffoonery
and boorishness. So I guess the Greeks didn't want you to be boring, nor did they want you to be foolish. And you can check that out in Ephesians 5:2 about what God has to say about being foolish too.
I think we all know what we as Dominicans, which vice we gravitate towards out of those two.
So we do love joy. Hey, that brings in the concept that you were talking about earlier, Ryan, right? About the 12 fruits of the Spirit, not to be confused with virtue.
Yes, so that should have been said when we were defining virtue at the beginning. So we need to distinguish the fruits of the Holy Spirit from the virtues. And I'm seeing more and more in different publications in the church, when they list out virtues, they'll often include the fruits, and that could be very dangerous for someone who, who might struggle with depression, or wrath or something like that. The point will be clear. Let me just list them real quick. So you have one of the fruits is charity, which is also a virtue. So right away, that's that's a little confusing. But we'll focus more on the next few. Which the next one is joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, generosity, gentleness, faithfulness, modesty, self-control, and chastity. So some of these are also virtues as well. But if we focus on joy, peace, and patience, I think that would be good enough. Those three in particular, those are only fruits. So we can't just sort of say, I'm going to will myself to be joyful or to be at peace or to be patient. No, we can will ourselves and be intentional about practicing the virtues. And once those habits become ingrained in us, and then once also we become docile to the gifts of the Holy Spirit, like we mentioned on last week's episode, then we can expect the joy and peace and patience to naturally grow out of us. Those are the best evidence that the Holy Spirit is alive and working in us, is when we see these fruits sort of come out. But we can't will ourselves to that. So someone struggling with depression, you can't just say like, oh, you need to just practice being joyful.
Right.
That's not going to work. You have to take a step back, start looking at these virtues, where and how can I practice these virtues better, and then with confidence know that joy is going to come from that.
Also, comparing is not a good idea because everybody has a different disposition. Father Mike literally just talked about this today.
Nice.
On the at the Catechism in a Year, just saying that we look for these fruits, but don't expect them to all look the same. We each have not only a different disposition, where some people might just have, and he used the term maybe Eeyore personalities or Tigger personalities, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way that you can tell whether this person is living a life of faith. But that doesn't mean that you don't practice the virtues too, to try to help yourself to exhibit it to the best of your ability, what these things are.
Yes, you can use them for a personal examination.
Right.
But yeah, it's always dangerous when we start examining others.
Yeah.
That can get tricky.
Get rid of that plank in our own eye, right?
Exactly.
So you're listening to Catholic Radio for Acadiana, and this is 90.5 FM, 99.5 FM, and 1250 AM. And we are your lay Dominicans, Third Order Dominicans, here in Lafayette, and we're based out of Our Lady of Wisdom Church. And we are sharing the fruits of our contemplation and with our Studium to Studio, and this is our apostolate. And we want to thank Stein Lumber for their sponsorship and ability to bring our fruits of contemplation to you. And we are talking about the virtues today. So we are talking about the cardinal virtues, the theological virtues, and I think a lot of folks just want to figure out, well, how can I really incorporate some of this into my daily life? I don't know if this falls under temperance or prudence, but I think the aspect and the danger, I think, of some social media. I mean, you can go on any of these social media sites and you go into the comment section, and I'm just absolutely appalled and shocked on what people will say. It's like, obviously, they didn't think this through, or they really don't care. But speech and what you say is can be either extremely positive or it can be detrimental to the other person. And Cheryl, what are some of the ways that we can maybe watch what we say and do and write? Is any advice for folks who are listening?
Well, the only thing I have right now is that we're about ready to start 30 Days to Taming Your Tongue. And this is a book that I got from Immaculée. And
Love her.
Yeah, and she carries around only like 3 books. And so I had one and I got the other 2. So I figured if she carries those around, then they're good. But I think that it made me actually, the talk about virtue, pull this out, kind of look, because if you know some of the writings from St. James, I don't have it memorized off the top of my head, but he talks about how, just like a bit in the mouth of a horse controls the entire horse, that sometimes taming our tongue is a beginning of a way to control everything in our virtue and so forth. And I think that's what you were talking about, Jeff, is you really need to, before we use words, and we need to just think about what we're going to do, make sure they're honest, make sure they're, especially we are here as Dominicans, truthful and honest. Truth and honesty are very important to us. So make sure they're sincere. And all the things that happen in Philippians, I think 4, where he says everything good, everything pure, everything honorable and just, these are the things that we want to say. These are the things we want to focus on when we talk.
So that y'all bring up a great point about, what happens when our passions get out of control, and just all the damage that we see from that on social media. So I think that it really starts with the foundation of temperance, where we, subordinate our passions to right reason. And St. Thomas Aquinas really focuses in on three areas in temperance. One is in relation to food. So normally when we do our examination of conscience for the sacrament of reconciliation, we say, oh, have I been gluttonous? But there's also this danger and rise of being too health conscious that we're seeing today. And then, a lot of, especially for females, and these body image disorders and bulimia, anorexia, things like that, and just taking to the extreme, only eating the leanest of calories. And so the virtue of temperance is all about learning how to celebrate well, how to enjoy these goods fully. So someone who is, living in that vice, they're not able to really enjoy a good meal well. And same thing with the glutton. They're always thinking about the next plate or the next bite or the next entree. They're not able to sit and enjoy what they have in front of them. And the other two areas St. Thomas focused on, one is alcohol. We see definitely in our culture in South Louisiana, this sort of reliance on alcohol and not being able to really enter into good, fruitful conversations and deepen relationships with other people, because you're constantly associating, friendship and gatherings with alcohol and drunkenness. And then there's chastity, which is, man, when I was in high school, this was talked about, so much, and still talked about a lot of great ministries in our church to fight, a lot of these addictions against chastity in the unmarried life. But what's not talked about as much as chastity within marriage, and sort of, the using this sort of unequal desires or lust, as sort of a bargaining tool. So, traditionally men struggle with lust more, and then the women will try to, maybe take advantage of that. There's at least a temptation for that. And then there's a sort of unrealistic expectation from the side of men, in marriage oftentimes. So it's important to be in control of this passion, and for the sake of a healthy marriage. And then temperance also deals a lot with addiction. So, we see often people are addicted to lustful things, and they're addicted to alcohol and their relationship with food. So as I pointed out last week, I think when it comes to addictions, it's very helpful to develop your habit of temperance in something you're not addicted to. So I use the example of alcohol. If you have a drink every single day, maybe not try to practice temperance right away by abstaining from alcohol for a period of time. Maybe start with food. Start by fasting with food, and then that will create the habit in you of learning how to deny yourself, and then move on to alcohol. What you're actually addicted to, and set a specific time period. Lent is great for that, or Advent is great for that. Like, okay, 40 days I'm not going to have any alcohol. I need to reset myself so that I can properly enjoy it. And then some people, as we know from AA and different things, they're never going to able to re-enter into that. But it's temperance is the lowest order of our passion. So if we have to give up something there completely, that's not dangerous for us or detrimental to our marriage, then it's okay. So alcohol is the best example of that. We can live a happy, fruitful life with permanently abstaining from that.
And there's, I think you could always say, moderation is the key for a majority of folks, and not to go to one extreme or the other. It's, and you mentioned, of course, alcohol in our culture, and even eating. I think in our society today, we feel like we don't either have time, or we do this binge thing, and whether it's food, whether it's alcohol, and I think maybe it was Chesterton said, always love a good steak, cigar, and bourbon or whiskey, but it all that revolved, what he was saying revolved around friends and discussion and raising that experience to another level, to something that we can walk away with of a greater experience, because obviously we're here on this earth for a short period of time. We want to enjoy each other's company, but we don't want to, have a base experience. We want to raise that level up to the next level of our gatherings together. And of course, we continue to do that when ultimately having that relationship with Christ.
So do we want to touch maybe on all four of them? We've done temperance and covered that. What about, are there any aspects of fortitude that we can share that would give people perspective on how to cultivate it?
Yeah, so fortitude, what we refer to as courage most often, is, practice with the most popular phrase in the Bible of "be not afraid." So we have to make sure that our fear doesn't interfere with our ability to act well. So I think with courage, oftentimes it's portrayed as, some people are either courageous or some people aren't. The martyrs were just, courageous people, and, some people are cowards. But no, this is actually a skill, a habit that we can slowly develop and grow in and become more courageous. We just have to, be able to step out of our comfort zone on a regular basis. When we're invited to try new things, just constantly accepting those invitations will slowly get us more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And there's a new show on National Geographic, forgot the name of it, but this guy, his catchphrase is, life begins where your comfort zone ends. And I love watching this guy. He's a character. But it's so true that, he really lived out this virtue of fortitude, in that just constantly looking for new ways to challenge himself and being open to new experiences that, it's sort of, like a ladder, just slowly work your way up. The courage of the martyrs just didn't come out of thin air. It was something practiced.
Or they might have leapfrogged into the gifts of the Holy Spirit.
That definitely occurred, but it didn't happen in a vacuum either way.
And you could also say, in some cases, maybe your faith will begin when you have that courageousness.
Ooh,
when
I like that.
You're able to do that, because even though we live in the most Catholic part of the country, I think, for us Dominicans, as lay Dominicans, we have our crosses that we wear. And I'll tell you, especially like growing up or young adults, you don't feel comfortable wearing a cross or expressing your Catholic faith in an external way. I mean, a lot of people are uncomfortable even doing the sign of the cross in public, saying grace before you eat in a restaurant, but that's also a signal of faith, and that little gesture, having that courageous gesture, can invigorate others, and especially when we go to other parts of the country where the Catholic faith is almost non-existent. That's another example of where we can have courage in our faith and giving courage to others as well.
I love that suggestion. I think that's a great place to start.
And that's where we'll have to end with part 1 of our virtue program. Stay tuned for next week as we complete our discussion on the virtues, cardinal and theological. And remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word. A shotgun blast was the last thing I heard. I rattled in the wind like a window pane. My soul's alright.